bastards! An asshole. And shit for brains.
You idiot! You little shit!
Pain? What's that?
What? Well, it's like a prickling, throbbing, sharp, unpleasant.
Oh, I'm familiar with that. It's what I feel toward you.
The Witch and the Hundred Knight 2 is a weird little game. Its concept and general mechanics are that of a simpler title, like a visual novel or a well-made indie game, but then some of its execution is just as grand as any big AAA title. Hell, in some ways it beats out very recent major releases. For a start, this game is almost entirely voice acted, and the actual voice-over work is top-notch and in English, even if the script and writing itself can fall a little flat at times. I don't mind doing a lot of reading, I enjoy visual novels and story-heavy JRPGs, but when I thought back to how little voice work Ni no Kuni 2 had relative to Witch and the Hundred Knight 2, I was left a little puzzled. In terms of quality, budget, development time, and publisher, you would expect these two games to switch places in the voiceover department. It also looks pretty damn good. The visual novel aspects are beautifully illustrated, the in-game graphics are heavily stylized but very clean, and there are even multiple graphic options that include a 4K mode on the PS4 Pro, though this does drop the FPS to a solid 30 rather than a targeted 60. At its core, The Witch and the Hundred Knight 2 feels like it's conflicted. It pulls in too many directions and all of its inherent strengths begin to get lost in the confusing mix. The game has a really strong story focus with really lengthy visual novel style cutscenes and interactive dialogue, but it's also a competent action hack and slash style game that bears some resemblance to Diablo, with an isometric view and tons of skills and customization. The problem is that while both these portions are actually pretty good in their own right, the ratios are way off, and overall pacing feels stop and start. You're either enjoying a decent story with fun characters for hours, or you are near mindlessly hacking and slashing your way through simplistic dungeon-like maps for hours with no real story to speak of. The combat is actually really quite fun, and bosses are definitely not a pushover, but the overall experience is marred by the simple and relatively boring maps and this insane mishmash of mechanics on top of what is already a solid fun system. Combat basics are great. You can equip up to 5 weapons which all represent one attack in a combo of 5. Assigning different types of weapons will change up your combo. You also have 4 equipable and upgradable skills and a few mechanics here and there that enhance the fundamentals. These are the things like the bloodletting system. If you complete a combo of 5 attacks, you can press L1 to instantly attack the closest enemy. If this happens to be the killing blow, you bloodlet all enemies in front of you and absorb ability points that are needed for skills. This also absorbs something called Giga-Calories, and this is the first of many mechanics that are just out of place and totally unneeded. Giga-Calories is kind of like a timer. It's an extra resource that you have to manage. It constantly ticks down and you'll need to bloodlet enemies to regain it, use items, or digest things from your stomach. And the stomach is the next weird and out of place mechanic. For some reason, every item you collect in combat gets put in your stomach. It's basically your inventory, but it isn't, because while things are in your stomach, you can only do one thing with them, and that's digest them to regain Giga-Calories. The items don't become part of your proper inventory, and therefore usable, until you reach the end of a loosely defined stage. And I say loosely defined because it's not like it says stage 1 and there's an obvious end. You could be playing these combat sections for God knows how long and reach multiple objectives marked on the map and save points that allow you to warp. You can even make it into new maps entirely before the game decides that's the end of the section and gives you your inventory. It's kind of frustrating to know you have a bunch of killer weapons in your stomach that you can't actually use for an indeterminate amount of time. The stomach is also pretty much never referenced in the story, so there is no real context for it. Why does the Hundred Knight have a stomach inventory? And speaking of the Hundred Knight, that's something I haven't mentioned yet. The Hundred Knight is essentially the character you are playing in the game. You are little more than an animated children's toy that does the bidding of others, or is sworn to protect certain characters. As always, I like to keep my videos as spoiler-free as possible, so to give you a brief summary of the overall narrative, there is a disease that causes ordinary citizens to develop a third eye on their foreheads. If that eye ever opens, destruction and chaos ensues. The eye releases the powers of a witch, and that witch can also be awoken inside the poor soul stricken with the condition. There is crude surgery and experiments performed to try and find a cure for the illness, and there is an entire force of quintessential good guys that resemble angels, plague doctors, and Valkyries who fight against woken witches. The 100 Knight is the stuffed toy of a poor girl who gets the disease, and witch powers soon animate you. And while it may seem as if you have your own free will, and indeed the game might have been designed as such, you are basically stuck doing whatever you're told. During conversations and story segments, you'll be given the option of self-assertion. This is where you can either agree, disagree, or question the order or the dialogue you're given. This can affect things later on in the game, but mostly the ending. The problem is that for the majority of the game, these decisions don't really seem to mean anything. If you deny something, you'll still have to do that thing, albeit with a slightly different line of dialogue prior to doing it, but you'll still have to do it. All of these things, the self-assertion, the stomach, the Giga-Calories, they just aren't needed. They don't often make sense or have any real impact, and when they do have an impact on your experience, it's in a negative way. Giga-Calories might as well not even exist because I don't think I have ever found myself in a critical condition in need of them. Certain things consume Giga-Calories, but they are rarely needed, like a self-heal. You also get items that heal you, and they are available in abundance. There are a bunch of other combat mechanics as well, they just seem to keep throwing things at you. You have multiple different forms that have different strengths, there's a big special attack that also buffs you, and on and on. If they cut out like 4 or 5 mechanics, they'd be left with a really solid system that isn't detracted by anything. But despite the overload, the combat is still quite satisfying and rather fun, if not a little repetitive due to the lack in enemy and map variety. The story is the real draw here, and while the writing can fall flat at times, the characters are all quite fun and it's something that kept me interested. I can't help but feel that the game overall would have been more enjoyable as a straight visual novel, but I would have settled for a better ratio and balance between the story and the combat. I know it seems like I have done nothing but criticize The Witch and the 100 Knight 2, but it honestly needs criticizing. It isn't too far off being a really great game. I don't rate games out of 10 anymore, but to give you a rough idea, a few tweaks, some refinement, and a little more time in the oven could turn this 6 to 7 into an 8 or 9. In its current state, it's still worth your time, just maybe not at full price unless you really like the idea of a very adult story being told through very colourful, innocent looking characters. Pick this up on sale, it's unlikely you regret the decision. Check out the link in the video description for its current price. Thanks for liking, subscribing and sharing, and I'll see you all soon.